I think this is one of the most underrated and undervalued UFC cards that has ever been made. I've been waiting on an auction, and I finally got one a few months ago. So let's go over the purchase price, the pop reports, the history of this card, and why I think it will hold long-term value. All right, so let's talk about this 2009 Topps UFC Round 1 Royce Gracie and why I think that this auto is one of the most underrated and undervalued UFC cards that have ever been made. Just to start, let's talk about the card itself. Spectacular looking card. We've got actually basically the same image that they use for his base card, but instead of having it be horizontal, it's vertical. And we also have the auto here right below. I think as far as the round one cards go, that these autos, in particular, the vertical ones are actually really nice because almost all of the base card images are the same, but instead of having them be horizontal, you also have the vertical image, which just displays way better. Similar to the Anderson Silva with the Chris Liebman. Also, I prefer this card way more over the actual base card. But I mean, you have the date that the fight happened, UFC 1. You have Royce Gracie in the gi, just absolutely dominating the bloody knuckles. So in addition to this card just looking good, I think that it has a ton of collectability because there's a ton of firsts with this card. Obviously, it's the first ever Topps licensed UFC card run, right? So it's kind of a debut run. It's also of UFC 1 with Royce Gracie here, which is also the first ever UFC champion. And it's his rookie and it's his first auto, right? So I think there's just a ton of collectability in the fact that there is, multiple debuts with this card, which I think is really fun and why I wanted to have it in my collection. I actually had a Prizm Royce Gracie auto that I kind of wanted as my Royce card. But when thinking about it, I was like, why don't I just go back in time and get this card? This card is so much better. It looks better. And the pop report, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is just so much lower. But I think this card has a ton of history with it. As well as being just, honestly, I think a pretty nice card. And sometimes when we're talking about these debut cards, I think some of them don't look that great. But this one is pretty solid. I mean, it's super simple. But as I mentioned earlier, I do kind of like the layout here and just all the information that the card gives you. So that's how the card looks. But let's kind of look at some more data to determine the real collectability of this card. Let's look at some pop reports here. And this was one thing that I've kind of covered or tried to cover in my last video talking about vintage UFC. But when you look at the pops on this, and this is combined with the three big grading companies, right? PSA, Beckett, and SGC. So PSA, this is only a PSA 6, and this is the 5. So right here, my card is actually a pop 4. So my card's a pop 4, but in all of PSA, there's only been 6 of these graded. And you can see almost all of them were 5, which is interesting. Then we go to Beckett. We've got 14 graded, and it looks like a ton of them are 7 and 7.5. And then over on SGC, we just have one SGC 6. So altogether, we're talking about like a pop 21. I mean, the card's been around for what, 14, 15 years. So I mean, I just think it's really good, really interesting, and the collectability is there because the supply is so low, and these cards do not come up on auction very often. I was looking to try and get an auction on this maybe for the past like 6 to 8 months, and I think I saw 2 of them come up in that time period. I was able to get the second one that finally sold, trying to kind of get some data on that. So not only is the pop report super low, but I just think that this card, with all the debuts, with how it looks, and also just with the actual history within this card, this is Royce Gracie. He won UFC 1, he won UFC 2, and he won UFC 4. So he's a legit 3-time UFC champion. And, this is back in the day when open weight, pulling hair, basically no rules. And I think whenever people are getting into collecting and getting into collecting UFC in particular, there's going to be a period of time when they go back into the sport and when they go back into vintage items. And I think when people go back into the origin of this sport, they're going to see Royce in there with absolute monsters, and they're going to see him wearing his gi just like in this photo. And the gi is an iconic look to me. It's a very, very defining moment, not only for the UFC as a company, but also for like MMA as a sport, and also for BJJ as a sport as well. And I think at that time it was super important, obviously, because BJJ competing against all the other art forms and all the other martial arts, it really solidified itself as maybe the best martial art for the time. And now in this day and age, is MMA, in this UFC climate, every single person in MMA has to be versed in BJJ and has to have that in their arsenal. So I think as more MMA fans come into UFC cards, I think there'll be a good overlap with also the BJJ community. And if you're an MMA fan and a BJJ fan, that makes like Royce even that much more fun to own and even that much more fun to collect. And he's kind of, one of the godfathers of BJJ. So for those reasons, I think that the Royce card is one of the most slept on ever in the UFC world. 3-time openweight champ, first ever debut card, first ever auto, super low pop, and I'm surprised that more people don't talk about this card. And since this is the Royce episode, I wanted to go ahead and show you what I'm going to be pairing the first auto with in the display case, and it's going to be the 2021 Immaculate Moments Royce Gracie on-card auto of 49. And this is when he actually won after the tournament, right? It's him celebrating with the family. UFC 1, Gracie wins the tournament, on-card auto. I think this is a super sick card, especially to pair it with, right? Because you have like him fighting, you have him in the moment fighting, and then you have him afterwards winning. So I think this is going to be really fun to put in the display case, and have them side by side. But when thinking about this card, I actually wanted to dive into some pop details on this because it's really interesting, and I think it's actually pretty surprising on how rare this card is as well. Okay, so first off, I bought this card a long time ago, and when I bought this card, it was $130, and a recent auction had it at $290, which is awesome. I mean, that's pretty high, honestly, but this is the one that I got a while back, like in 2 years ago around October. But one thing that I thought was interesting with this is that it is an L49, right? Which sounds like a high print run, but in all actuality, when you think about it, if we take, let's say, 2023 Panini Prizm, and we look at all of these separate, if we add all of these up to 49, really what it equals is basically an up 10. So there's 3 up 10, so that's 30, plus 16, 46, 47, 48, and 49, and 50. So basically, the of 49, because there's no other print, there was no other cards printed beneath the of 49. It's basically an of 10 parallel. And you kind of have to think about this when you're talking about print run with cards. It's not really like obvious to us, and it doesn't really make sense. But when you're thinking about of 10s, you kind of have to put all of the of 10s together and then put everything else below that. And that basically is the rarity of the of 10. So just interesting, as well as the 2022 Select, which is even more. You have 30, 38, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52. So you have 50 different parallels of the of 10 and below. So, I mean, when you're talking about what would you rather have, right? Would you rather have the of 49 and there is no other print run below that? So there's only 49 of these cards in existence? Or do you want 52 cards all separated out into, various parallels? And obviously, if you had a 1-of-1, that's going to be better. But with the of 10s are really, one of 52 cards that have been manufactured. And I guess I'm not surprised at this because Immaculate cards are so difficult to grade. But this was a Pop 2, one at PSA, one at BGS. I have no plan to get this graded just because there is some edge damage because of how thick these Immaculate cards are. Maybe it would get a 7 probably at best, maybe an 8, but I don't really want to risk it. I think it looks good. It looks good. It'll look good in the display case. Looks good in a one touch, and that's good enough for me. Thank you for watching this episode with the Royce Gracie cards. If you like UFC cards, you like my channel, go ahead and check out these videos for more UFC card content just like this.